The smartest person you know has already been destroyed by one. Not the person who dropped out, not the one who makes impulsive decisions every single time they're given a choice. The one who reads 3 books a month, the one who spots manipulation in movies and laughs at the people on screen who fall for it. That person, the one sitting across from you at dinner who seems to have genuinely figured life out, who asks the right questions, who listens in a way that makes you feel worth listening to. They are either inside it right now and calling it the most meaningful relationship of their life, or they are somewhere alone at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling, trying to reconstruct exactly how they ended up where they ended up. Here is the answer that no therapist will give you in the first session, and no self-help book will put on its cover, because it is too threatening to the comfortable story we all need to believe. Harvey Cleckley was a psychiatrist who spent decades doing what almost no one else was willing to do. He sat with them, not the violent ones, not the ones society had already labeled and processed and filed away as obvious dangers, the ones who were charming, the ones who were magnetic in a way that was difficult to describe and impossible to ignore, the ones who could walk into a room and within minutes make every single person in it feel like the most important, most interesting, most seen person alive. In 1941, he published The Mask of Sanity, and what he found across all those years of patient, close observation should have permanently rewritten everything we think we know about the relationship between intelligence and vulnerability. But it did not, because what he found was too uncomfortable, too directly threatening to the one story that intelligent people need most. The story that says awareness is armor, that understanding human nature means you are protected from its worst expressions, that being smart means being safe. Cleckley discovered that the psychopathic personality is not defined by what it does. It is defined entirely by what it does not have. No genuine emotional response beneath the surface of the performed one. No inner architecture of guilt or shame or love operating quietly in the background. Not suppressed by trauma, not locked away behind walls that the right person could eventually break through. Not buried under years of pain, waiting to finally be excavated by someone patient and perceptive enough to reach it. Simply absent. Like a house that looks completely and warmly furnished from the street, every light on, curtains moving, the smell of something cooking drifting from the windows. But when you finally walk through the door and look down, there is no floor. But here is what Cleckley also found, and this is the thing that will stay with you long after this video ends, maybe permanently. The absence is perfectly concealed, not by accident, not by deliberate daily effort, not by conscious strategy in the way we usually picture conscious strategy, but by something colder, and in many ways more efficient than strategy. A flawless, automatic, lifelong performance of everything that genuine depth looks like from the outside. The warmth that reads as real, the vulnerability that arrives at exactly the right moment, the specific and almost overwhelming intensity of attention that makes you feel, for perhaps the first time, genuinely and completely perceived. The feeling that this person sees you in a way that no one, not your closest friends, not the people who have known you since you were a child, has ever quite managed to. All of it. Performed. A performance so precise, so individually calibrated to the specific person sitting across from it, that it defeats intelligent observers, not despite their intelligence, but directly and specifically because of it. And Cleckley was very deliberate about explaining why. He said the performance works best on the people with the most interior life, because depth recognizes the shape of depth. When someone mirrors your complexity back at you with apparent precision, your brain does not stop and ask how they learned the exact shape of your interior so quickly. It assumes they must contain it themselves, because that is the assumption your brain has always made and has almost always been right to make. That behavior is the window into character, that the outside reflects the inside, that someone who speaks the language of your soul with that particular kind of fluency, who seems to already know the words before you have finished forming them, must have a soul that generates and speaks the same language from its own depths. You are not being naive when you make that assumption. You are not failing some test of emotional intelligence that smarter or more cautious people pass. You are being defeated by one of the most fundamental and, in virtually every other context, completely reliable assumptions the human mind makes about other human beings. That what you see on the outside is connected to something real on the inside. And that assumption is correct almost every single time you make it, which is precisely what makes the exception so effective. Now here is the part where most content about narcissism stops, because it is the comfortable part, the part that feels like it gives you something actionable and protective. They show you the red flags. They give you the checklist: love bombing, idealization, devaluation, discard. They package the cycle in clean, clinical language, and they leave you with the impression that if you had only known the list beforehand, if you had only been slightly more informed going in, you would have been completely fine. But that is not what Cleckley found, and that framing is not just incomplete. It is actively misleading in a way that causes real harm, because it locates the problem in a lack of information. And the people sitting with this wound right now did not lack information. They had read the books. They knew every term. Some of them could have stood up in front of a classroom and taught the material without notes. What Cleckley found was more disturbing than ignorance, and far more useful than a checklist. He found that the entry point is never a red flag. It is a green flag. Not just any green flag, but the most vivid, most specifically targeted, most perfectly calibrated green flag your particular psychology has ever been shown. Something so precisely matched to your individual longing that it does not just quietly slip past your defenses. It makes your defenses feel like an embarrassing overreaction to something obviously beautiful. Think about the most meaningful moment of the early connection. Not the dramatic ones, the quiet one. The conversation that felt genuinely different from every conversation you had ever had before. The moment they said the exact thing that no one had ever said to you. The thing you'd been waiting, without ever fully knowing you were waiting, to hear another person say. The moment you thought, finally, someone who actually understands, someone who sees the specific thing I've been trying to show people for years, and they just see it, effortlessly, without any explanation required, completely and immediately. That moment was not luck. It was not natural chemistry between two compatible people. It was not the universe deciding it was finally your time. That moment was the end product of a data collection process so efficient and so completely invisible that by the time it delivered that feeling into your chest, you had already provided everything required to produce it. Cleckley called this the simulation of empathy, and it is not conscious manipulation in the way we typically picture manipulation, with calculation and deliberate cruelty running underneath a surface of warmth. It is something colder, and in many ways more difficult to protect against than conscious cruelty would be. It is a system that reads the emotional landscape of another person the way a scanner processes a document. Flat, efficient, completely accurate, and entirely without any investment in the content it is processing. They did not feel moved by what moved you. They did not sit with what you shared and let it land and let it matter. They cataloged it, filed it, and then, with a precision that feels from the inside exactly like intimacy, and is, from the outside, the precise opposite of it, they use the file. Here is what that means in practice, and this is the specific thing worth writing down. Somewhere, you will find it again later. The more emotionally articulate you are, the more complete the data you provide without realizing you are providing it. The more introspective you are, the more precisely you describe your own wound in ordinary conversation without ever intending to describe it at all. The more genuine work you have done on yourself, the more self-knowledge you have accumulated over years of difficult, honest effort. The more detailed and navigable and useful the map you hand over becomes. Self-awareness, the exact thing that was supposed to be your protection, The specific capability you were told would make you choose better and see more clearly, and love with more wisdom and discernment becomes the most accurate targeting system they have ever been given access to. You did not fall for this because you were broken. You did not fall for this because something was wrong with you or missing in you or underdeveloped in you. You fell for this because you were whole enough, complex enough, genuinely alive enough on the inside to be worth mapping in the first place. Now here's what happens after the map is complete, and why intelligent people stay so much longer than anyone who loves them can understand. The mask slips, not dramatically, not all at once in a single undeniable moment of revelation that makes the decision obvious, but in small, quiet, easily explained moments that your brain notices immediately and immediately begins to work around. A flash of coldness in a situation where warmth should have been completely automatic. A response that lands slightly wrong, like a translation that got every individual word technically correct, but somehow missed entirely the feeling that the original sentence was trying to carry. A moment where you say something genuinely and carefully vulnerable, and what comes back is the right words in the wrong register, the way a person might sound if they were reading empathy off a card they had memorized rather than generating it from something they actually felt. Your brain registers each inconsistency. It logs it somewhere. But then it does the thing that is the actual mechanism of the trap, the thing that has nothing to do with stupidity and everything to do with a specific kind of intelligence you have. It generates an explanation. Because an intelligent mind cannot sit comfortably with unresolved inconsistency, it experiences a gap in the narrative as a problem that exists to be solved, and it is very good at solving problems. So you build a theory. They are under enormous stress right now. They had a childhood that closed off certain emotional responses as a survival mechanism. They are genuinely afraid of this level of intimacy because they have never been allowed to have it safely before. They are not used to someone actually staying when things get difficult. The theory is sophisticated. It is compassionate. It is psychologically literate, and it accounts for nuance and history and the genuine complexity of how human beings are shaped by what happens to them. It is also, in the most important and consequential way possible, a fiction you are writing about someone who does not have the interior life your fiction requires. You're projecting a rich and complicated backstage onto a structure that is entirely and only surface. And the more sophisticated your theory becomes, the more real the projected interior feels to you. The more you invest in the explanation, the more attached you become to the version of this person that lives inside your explanation rather than to the actual person in front of you. This is exactly why intelligent people do not leave faster. They leave slower, sometimes so much slower that the people who love the most begin to quietly question their judgment in ways they never have before, because they have invested more cognitive and emotional architecture into the construction of who this person is than anyone around them can see or accurately measure from the outside. And walking away means something categorically different for them than it does for someone who never built the construction. For them, leaving means admitting that the most meaningful connection they have ever experienced was a reflection, that the depth they felt was their own depth, aimed back at them by something that contained none of its own. That is not just heartbreak, that is a collapse of category. It means the instrument you have always used to measure reality, your own emotional intelligence, your own carefully developed capacity for depth and perception, and reading other people accurately produced a completely and utterly false reading in the situation that mattered most. And if it produced a false reading there, the question that follows that realization is quiet and absolutely devastating in the way that only quiet questions can be. Where else has it gotten things wrong? There's also something that happens in the body during this period that is almost never discussed clearly enough. The nervous system does not distinguish between the loss of a genuine connection and the loss of a simulated one. The biology of attachment does not evaluate the quality of what it attached to before it decides how to respond to losing it. It only knows that something it organized itself around has become unstable, and it responds with the full chemical and neurological weight of grief and panic and compulsive repair behavior. This is why the pull back toward them feels physical and not just emotional. Why the intellectual understanding of what happened does not touch the pull at all. Why you can know with complete cognitive clarity that this person is not what you believe them to be, and still find yourself composing messages at 3 a.m. that you will delete before sending. That is not a character flaw. That is not weakness or stupidity or an absence of self-respect. That is your nervous system doing precisely and efficiently what it evolved to do. It attached. And now it is trying with everything it has to survive the withdrawal of what it attached to, knowing that will not make the pull stop immediately. But it means you can stop spending your remaining energy calling it a personal failing. Cleckley spent years watching what happened to people after the realization, not during the relationship itself, after, the recursive, grinding self-doubt that sets in once you finally understand what you are inside. And what he observed in the people who came through it, with something still intact, was not that they had made themselves harder, not that they had constructed higher walls or made a decision to trust less, or concluded that their openness had been the fundamental mistake that needed correcting. What he observed was something far more specific and far more actionable than a general hardening. The people who recovered cleanest were not the ones who finally assembled the perfect diagnosis, who learned every clinical term and could trace the entire cycle on a whiteboard and explain the neurological underpinnings at a dinner party, while still, privately, replaying specific moments in their heads at 3 a.m. The people who recovered cleanest were the ones who turned the question completely around. Not why did they do this to me? Because that question is a closed door with nothing behind it, no interior to explain the behavior, no real answer available. But instead, what was I looking for that made this feel so completely and immediately like the answer? Because underneath every mask that works on someone, every performance that lands with that specific and devastating precision, there is a wound it found, a hunger it located and temporarily fed. A version of being seen that the person had been waiting for long enough that when something arrived offering even a perfect simulation of it, their entire system said yes before their mind had time to formulate a single question. For some people, it is the need to finally be the one person who understands someone that no one else has ever managed to understand. The particular meaning that comes from being let in somewhere that others have been kept out. For some, it is the need to be chosen completely and without any visible reservation by someone who appears to choose very little and very carefully. When someone like that focuses entirely on you, the intensity reads as irrefutable evidence of your value. For some, it is the need to have their intelligence genuinely met, to exist in a conversation where they do not have to simplify or slow down or edit themselves to maintain the connection. Whatever the precise and individual shape of the hunger is, it existed before the mask arrived. It was already there, already open, already waiting. And that hunger, not them, not the specific things they did, not the mechanics of how the performance worked, that hunger is the only investigation now worth conducting. Because they are a closed system with no accessible interior. A performance with no backstage and no explanation that leads anywhere real. There's nothing in that direction that will give you anything back. But you have a backstage. You have an interior. You have a version of yourself that was so completely and genuinely certain this was real that you built the structure of your daily life around it. That version of yourself deserves more than a forensic breakdown of what was done to them. That version deserves to have the hunger named out loud, understood without shame, and finally, properly, fed by something that actually has the capacity to feed it from a real interior of its own. Here's the final thing Cleckley gave us, the only diagnostic that has ever reliably held across every case he documented. It is not a single behavior observed once in a difficult moment. It is the pattern of behavior that emerges when consequences are removed entirely. when no audience is present, when you're already attached enough that the calculation of leaving feels more dangerous than the calculation of staying, when the cost of cruelty has been reduced to zero, and what appears in that space is the only honest data point available. Anyone can perform decency when performing it costs them something real, when an audience exists to observe and remember. The mask only becomes fully visible in the private moments. The moments where warmth would cost nothing at all and still does not come. The moments where basic care would be completely automatic in any other person you have ever known, and is conspicuously, confusingly absent here. Notice those moments, not the grand gestures that happen in public, not the warmth that exists when others are watching and the performance is still fully operational. The quiet moments when no performance is required and what shows up in the silence anyway. That specific gap between who they are when light is directed at them and what remains when it is not is the only data point in the entire experience that has ever told the truth about anything. If something in this video just gave a name to something you've been carrying for a long time without ever quite being able to name it, put it in the comments. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because the moment you name a thing outside of the interior of your own head is the first moment it stops being a private weight you carry alone and becomes something external that you can actually look at directly. And that, specifically that, is where it begins to lose its hold on you.